Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. And if DJ or Laura walks in, we'll put them on the panel. Sounds good. Unless Beaver, you really want to jump up and join the pilot panel. Mark, you want to jump in and join the pilot panel? We're short of pilots, so if you want to fill a seat in, go for it.
You have to bring your own seatbelt if you got any spares.
Okay, let's start with a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, thank you for the opportunity to come together and elevate, and particularly for your wisdom and guidance, and particularly for the experience that you have given others that they can share with newer pilots or learn from each other. And we ask that you would bless this gathering right now and give us wisdom and your guidance. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, let's start on this side, and let's go right down the panel real quick and introduce yourselves. And let's see, let's go name, where you're from, 10 seconds of where you're from, project, etc., what you do on a regular basis, and then let's say that your favorite aircraft to fly.
Just all the easy stuff.
Well, I'm Dwayne Harris. Work in the Philippines. Started the Palmas Aviation Ministry there. And it's funner to fly helicopters than it is airplanes. I fly both.
I'm Nathan, and currently back to Pacific Union College, so in a training role for pilots. And it's unfair to ask the favourite aeroplane, but I guess the one that got me started in flying was a C model Piper Aztec, the J.L. Tucker that was donated by the Quiet Hour, and that's the fault. That aircraft is why I'm here today.
All right, Jed Wickwire, I think you all know who I am. So yeah, did fly missions in Guyana. My favorite aircraft to fly is Cessna 180, 185.
Yeah, Mark Turnbull, and from Wings of Hope Vanuatu, and I'm looking forward to share once again. I'm looking forward to sharing tomorrow about my story, which is a big story. But yeah, I'm a mole man, and I've flown 4,500 hours in the bush airstrips in a mole M7 235B, and yeah. But I was very interested in looking at that Bearhawk yesterday because it's kind of like a mole turned into a beast. So one day I'm hoping to fly a Bearhawk 5.
Just DJ, just your introduction, what you're doing, where you're from, and what's your favorite aircraft to fly.
Okay. I'm working in Bolivia. We've been there almost 10 years and been learning how to be a missionary little by little. God is good. What we're doing, we take medical professionals into remote communities. I have two of my team here, Ryan and Chio. They're back here on the waving at you. Chio's our doctor for our medical team, and Ryan's does everything, but right now he's getting flight training to come back as a pilot with us too. So we use the airplane to take the medical team into the places that would be difficult or impossible to routinely access otherwise. And then we follow it up with missionaries, Bible workers. So one of my friends down there that runs a similar ministry for the Baptists, he says the work could happen without the airplane, but it wouldn't. It just wouldn't. So that's why we have an airplane there. I like to fly whatever airplane gets me there. And the airplane, I used to be a serious aviation addict, like over the top addicted. But God's weaned me from that little by little, sometimes with big chunks of time away from aviation. And he's made me appreciate more how the airplane helps the mission rather than, I mean, I still like airplanes, but now going to Oshkosh isn't like going to a church service anymore. You know?
My name is Jeff Sutton, and I live in Belize, and I do missionary training. So I teach evangelism, and I teach how to fix small engines and build things. It's a lot of really simple, not really anything that difficult, but super essential and useful stuff. And so I do that 6 months out of the year. And then dispersed in between that, I fly and do a whole bunch of other things. And so and what's my favorite airplane to fly? If I had a plane that had like 30 hours of range and could carry an infinite amount of stuff, it'd be great. But the Mooney probably, I have a little Mooney missile, and I've sat in it for a long, long time. And it almost flies itself. I'd say that's probably my favorite plane.
I got it turned on. So I'm actually been out of aviation for about 2 years because I retired from the airlines, and my name is Veronica, by the way. I wasn't going to go back to flying, actually. I had hung up my uniform and I decided I was done. But the Lord has called me back into this field for some reason. So I'm currently at Andrews preparing to be a flight instructor. I still have to pass my exam. But my favorite airplane is a 747. And I flew it for 2 years. And I actually just like to fly anything that has wings. I'm not sure why that was funny, but anyway.
It kind of fits the bill. 30 hours of range and infinite amount of stuff you can carry. I think we like the same kind of planes.
Okay. So basically, I wanted to start out by opening up to the floor. You see the broad spectrum of experience and perspective up here, particularly for those that are in training to be pilots or are getting ready to go to the mission field as a pilot or want to be pilots in the mission field, etc. Questions? What do you got? Beaver.
I think a question that's always on a new person's mind that wants to be a pilot or that is in training to be a pilot is how can you afford to be a pilot and get those hours that you need to do mission work?
Does that resonate with everybody?
I'm just going to throw something into that mix really quickly because I think this is that everyone wants to know how many hours they need. And I think we need to move away a little bit from the hours threshold to the standards. And I think Nathan actually you're addressing that very directly in what your training program is.
Yeah, this is... Got to figure out how to fly an airplane first. The cost of training is huge. I think we all know the numbers that we've talked about, and over the years, when I started flight training, the wage at that time was, I think, $4.15 per hour, and we could rent an aeroplane for about $35 per hour at Andrews. I remember that day. And this year at PUC, our starting price is $205 per hour before the instructor gets on board. So that's a big question. Of course, a lot of organizations, our church used to have paid positions for pilots when they graduated. Now that's fairly slim. I don't know how many paid positions we have in the church at the moment for pilots, but it's not yet very many. So we've taken a very direct approach. And the three colleges, Andrews, Walla Walla and PUC, have all gotten their heads together, and we've come up with, I think, a pretty ingenious plan. And to the point, the FAA too has turned down away from hours and focused more on proficiency. So what we have going now is that, and it hasn't fully come into place yet, but our training colleges and universities, Andrews is in the same boat, we are working hard to have pilots start in a glider first. You can do the glider private pilot license under the FAA system under Part 141 in a total time of 4 hours. 4 hours is a private pilot license. A glider costs about $50 per hour to operate. So you're talking $1,000 to $1,500 for a private pilot license. Once you've got that, then the next step is a commercial pilot license, and the reason why will become apparent in a minute. The FAA Part 141 Appendix D for the commercial, let's go private first. Private commercial for the glider is a 6-hour course. So once you've got your private pilot license glider, hop into the glider again for the commercial pilot license, a grand total of 10 hours flight time at your $50 per hour plus your tows and instructor. You now have a FAA pilot certificate that says commercial pilot. It isn't a glider, but it is a commercial pilot. Now, for those of you that are kind of thinking, what's going on here, don't forget that the most high-performance aircraft in the world have always been gliders. The first airplanes, before we got the Wright brothers launching a Kitty Hawk, they started off with gliders. When we broke the sound barrier, the first airplane to break the sound barrier, the Bell X-1, and survive, was a glider. And then, as we've gone through the space program, the X-15 up to the space shuttle, they're all gliders. So now that we have a commercial glider pilot license with very good stick and rudder skills under Appendix I of Part 141, you can now get a commercial pilot in a powered aircraft. So if you're a helicopter guy, a rotorcraft, or a fixed-wing guy, an aeroplane guy, a 55-hour conversion course under FAA 141 Appendix I now gives you FAA commercial pilot. Now, of that 55 hours, 11 of those can also be in a simulator or an AATD. So basically, 44 hours at $205 per hour rather than 250 hours at that same price, and I argue we have a higher quality pilot. Now, Blewett Andrews, ourselves at PUC, the guys at Walla Walla are thinking about it is if we start using our full motion simulators, we now have the ability to not only lower the cost further, but also massively improve the quality. And for Veronica and myself in the airline environment, we've been in full motion simulators. The first time I ever hopped into an Airbus 321 with 240 people behind me, the guys in the back behind me, that was my first flight. I'd never been in an airplane before with that many people. It was all in the simulator, but when you hop into a real airplane, Veronica can confirm it's the same thing. You don't feel scared or nervous or different. It's just like, oh yeah, the scenery's a bit more detailed perhaps, but other than that, it's all the same thing. It feels the same, it flies the same, the checklists are the same, the procedures are the same. You have less emergencies in real life. But it's the way of the future, and the good thing about all this VR technology that's coming out is we can now do this much more cost effectively. So this coming fall at PUC, we're going to have students developing this technology. The one final step at PUC, I think Walla Walla and Andrews are thinking about it, we have totally overhauled the curriculum so that now when you enroll for flight training classes, we give 8 credit units for each of the 3/3 of the commercial pilot course. So with the commercial pilot course at PUC, you get 24 hours of tuition credit onto your flight account, which gives you $12,000 straight off the cost of your flight training, which is already probably less than $12,000. So to cut a long story short, it'll cost you less. You probably actually get a credit in your account for getting a commercial pilot license. So we are working very actively to get the costs down. We think the quality is going to go so much higher. I talked to Gary Roberts about 6 months ago specifically about this glider concept, and he was very much in favour of it because of the requirement he has for his aircraft to have really good stick and rudder skills for those PC-6 porters and that kind of stuff. Sorry for talking too much.
Not a problem, but I got to have a follow-up question to Dwayne or Jeff or though DJ. How do you feel about a pilot coming out of a program like that with a lot lower hours but potentially higher proficiency? What's your gut feeling on that? Because for years we've used hours as kind of the baseline requirement before launching pilots into the field environment. And what is your perspective on potentially paying less attention to that and more attention to the pilot's capability overall?
I think there's potential there. You know, building a lot of time flying 5-mile patterns and stuff in a Cherokee doesn't translate that well. And we had the Baptist mission in Bolivia had a pilot come, and he had the 500-hour requirement because that was the baseline, but it was all with a mission organization. It was a mission aviation training specific. And he was head and shoulders above anything we had seen with 500 hours. So there's potential for more quality for sure.
Yeah, I've never felt the hour requirement had anything to do with proficiency. I mean, yes, it does add a little bit to experience, but as DJ said, if all of that's just flying a pattern or something, it doesn't give you that much of real world experience. So I think it's a good idea, and that things should be based on proficiency, not hours, simply because also not everyone has the same, I guess, natural abilities. You'll have some guys with 100 hours that flies better than a guy with 1,000 hours sometimes. So proficiency should be the base and the standard of things.
You know, I had an opportunity to fly with Clyde Peters. I don't know if any of you know that name. If you talk about legends in aviation, that's a legend. And we did some training in Nebraska, and he told the old, Nebraskan windsock joke about it's a logging chain. And I don't know if any of you heard those jokes, but Clyde Peters made me cry. It was some very intense training. We were doing we were using his 182, and he was old school cowboy flight instructor, and I call him a shouter. So he was a shouter, and he's like, "You're flying a wind machine, man. Make it go where it's supposed to go." And all right, I'm trying. We're only got a 60 knot crosswind and a 182. We're doing the best we can, So it was definitely intense. So yeah, I put in 40 hours that week, and it seemed like eternity. But I got really good at something that week, and that was crosswinds. And eventually I used it, and I was really glad. He taught me a bunch of things that I'd never learned before. So what I'm going to say is this: there's pieces in aviation, like crosswinds, tailwheel. You're talking about Gary and Porters and tailwheel training. There's this piece of getting really good at that, and ask me right now if I'm ready to hop in a tailwheel. Well, I mean, nope, not really. I'd have to get brushed up on it. I got lots of hours and lots of stuff, but today. And I've got an endorsement for a tailwheel. But today, Jeff isn't ready to go fly in a 30-knot crosswind and a tailwheel. That's not something I'm ready to do. So there's things about aviation, even if you sharpened up to the point at one point, you could do that. And then there's going to come to a point, well, you probably won't be able to do that again, because it takes some things take a lot of proficiency. So recognizing your own level of proficiency and acknowledging that and flying within that sphere. So let's just talk about short field stuff. Well, short is very relative in what you're flying. Short, and that is it a champ? You're no Vagabond. That's short. Yeah, the Vagabond. Yeah, that's one thing. It's different. And the short and the Bearhawk is one thing. Short and the Merlin's a whole other thing. And they were asking me can you go into a 2,600 foot strip? It's like, I know people that probably could, but I can't. I ain't not there. I'm not proficient enough. Could I get there? Probably. It'd take me some time, and we'd have to go practice. But so just recognizing, some people think like you hit a threshold and you're there. It's the same thing with the instrument. Yesterday, Judd and I were just having this conversation. Well, let's just jump across here. Well, neither of us I've not flown a Garmin G1000, and he hasn't done a bunch of it. Nah, we'll do it. There's just what's the risk benefit? There's not that much. Let's just do something different, So recognizing that, flying within you, recognizing your own limitations, learning how to grow in the things that you're going to be flying in. So experience levels. I was You know, there's the cross-country experiences, making judgments, weather decisions, dealing with, you know, lots of things that happen in that kind of an environment where you're traveling more than a couple hours. That's just a whole different field than where you're jumping in on 30-minute flights or 15-minute flights into short strips that aren't that far away. That's a totally different level of proficiency. And what kind of operation are you working on? International flights are a whole nother, you know, when you're starting to stretch out 2,000 miles is a whole nother kettle of fish of type of proficiency. So, you know, Gary Roberts' situation where he's flying a Porter, and those are 15-minute flights up into the mountains. But even those have their own sets of limitations. He's got strip times. He can't get into certain strips after 10 o'clock. You know, he starts out at 5 a.m. in the morning. Gary actually flies, I would say, probably the most challenging stuff on the planet. I don't know of anything that's more difficult to fly than what he flies. But it's really short. And you got to be actually really good. It's not amateur stuff. But in a certain realm of things. But to say that ask Gary if he's ready to jump in a big heavy twin turbine and fly somewhere, he's not ready. He's not even, the instrument, the whole thing, he's just not really into that. He would need to get proficient in that whole set himself. But so setting time limits it's kind of dangerous to say, well, it's just, I wouldn't say dangerous. It's misleading sometimes to think, hey, I've got this set of time and that's what you're shooting for, where proficiency is something.
You mean there's a reason the FAA has type ratings?
Yeah, type ratings, you know, that's a whole nother kettle of fish, I'd say. But yeah, it's just the time limits and saying, okay, in certain types of time you'd be proficient. Well, it's just not the reality. Proficiency is what you're really looking at, and that is being a competency. Can you do this?
Okay. Let's jump back and see if we have any other questions in the pilot category from all the Belgrove.
So along that note, would you say that the way we build our time, would you say that CFI would be helpful to do that, or doing instruction like taking time to do boundary towing in a tailwheel aircraft? Like what type of experience do you say we should build when we're trying to train for mission work? I might have 400 hours of time, having 400 hours total with helicopter, tailwheel, and airplane. Someone I might have 500 hours just doing 5-mile patterns. How would you say that experience we would look for that type of training, or what would we do with our flying?
I had a mentor when I was a new pilot who used to fly the Chrome Dome missions over the polar ice cap during the Cold War. He was a B-52 pilot, would stay up for 3 or 4 days at a time. He had a saying that really stuck with me. He said, "Practice does not make perfect." He said, "Only perfect practice involving proper prior preparation makes perfect." So I had a student that had 1,000 hours in his logbook. I would jokingly say he had 1 hour of flight experience because he did the same thing 1,000 times, and he is now dead, unfortunately. It seems that when it comes to preparing ourselves, it's really important to ask myself, what can I do on today's flight that's going to be better than yesterday's flight? And we ask, proficiency, tailwheel, or banner towing, or instructing. All of those things are very, very good. But whatever it is that you're doing today, how can my flight today be a really good flight? Even if it's a humble flight, a Cessna 172 or a 150 or something, what am I going to do today that's going to make me a better pilot? So I have, I think all the pilots here probably agree, we have a bunch of human factors that we train. We say, hey, before I do my pre-flight inspection today, I'm going to make some parameters, I'm going to make some decisions. I'm going to decide to monitor my fuel burn very closely. So I'm going to say, I want to check my fuel tanks, for example, before I depart. I'm going to estimate my fuel burns. I'm going to calculate all of the things that I adjusted. And at the end of my flight, I'm going to guess how much fuel is in my fuel tank. And I'm going to check it after I've guessed. And as a competition to myself, over the years of my career, how close can I guess? Now, when I'm flying an Airbus or when I'm flying a PC-12 or when I'm flying an aircraft that's a bit more complicated and has all of the fuel information right there, it's easy to get a bit complacent and say, I don't need to check those things because it does it all for me. But a good pilot is going to say, I don't want to just go along for the ride. I want to do something better today. Now, for me personally, I learned more on my first flight student than all of my ratings combined. So if there's any way at all that you can become a flight instructor, that does help the mental space as far as planning ahead, thinking ahead. What are the mistakes that I would do if I was a student? How can I anticipate being a better pilot? Being a teacher, I think, is the best way possible to learn. So definitely instructing would be one of the best ways. And then as far as going into mission flying, there are so many different types of mission flying, and all of these skills are perishable skills. So if you become a tailwheel expert, for example, that's wonderful. But if you then take 6 months off, you're going to have a skill that has atrophied. So you've got to get that skill back. If you're going to be an instruments guy or a guy who does the long cross-country stuff like Mr. Jeff, there's a special skill set that you need to keep up. So less important than what the skill set is that you learn, probably the more important thing is, how can I as a pilot do really good at whatever I'm working at right now? Whatever the aircraft is, whatever the mission is, whether it's a 15-minute flight or a 3-hour flight, a 25 nautical mile or a 2,500 nautical mile, whatever it is you're doing, ask yourself, how can I do this better than yesterday? And if every single flight you set the standard, I'm going to go as high as I can, then whatever you do, you'll always do better and better. And that, to me, is what makes an excellent pilot. A book I'm going to write down, Tony Kern, Flight Discipline. He has a thick book that goes in detail about this kind of topic. How can I be the best pilot that I can possibly be? And that book, Tony Kern, US Air Force Colonel, I know it's not humanitarian mission flying, but his book is very instructive for us in humanitarian flying.
I'll just bounce off of what you said. I think I learned the most flight instructing. I remember teaching holding patterns with NDBs, and there's almost obsolete now that we hardly even do that anymore. But to get up, and I was in the clouds, and I was like, wow, I got to teach this thing. And in that same lesson, I was learning at the same time, because you had to explain with your student. Well, we did it before we took off, of course, but once we get up. So I think flight instructing is a very important place. Teaching anything, teaching Bible lessons. You learn your Bible better by teaching someone what you've just learned. That's what the Bible tells, that we need to. The gospel, once you learn it, Ellen White also says you can't keep it to yourself. And so I think it applies to every aspect of our life. And teaching others comes natural, because when you're young, you're teaching your siblings, and when you get old, you have children, you're teaching them. So you can't go wrong with the flight instructing. The important thing is, like he said, though, is just consistency, and don't get complacent, and realize you can get rusty. I was out for 2.5 years, and getting back in the Archer was foreign to me. Trying to maintain level flight was kind of odd in a steep turn. So actually still working on that. So anyway, I do believe that flight instructing is good. Towing banners, it's okay, but it doesn't develop a lot of the skills that you would have in interpersonal skills with other people.
Going off of what Nathan was saying, being self-critical, like every time you do a flight, how can I do this better? I had watched a little interview with Bob Hoover, and I think he's considered the best pilot, stick and rudder pilot to ever have lived. And he basically said every time he goes out and flies, he's always, how could I have done that better, smoother, more coordinated. So, not thinking you've reached it. You're always striving to do things better than you did the flight before is important.
I think one of the things, like Nathan was mentioning, we're looking for excellence, and that's something you're never gonna you're never going to be able to hit the 10 out of 10, consistently. But it's more like being a doctor where you're practicing all the time. But most people can get the skills to fly an airplane in a couple hundred hours. That's not really the issue. I think the reason for the 500-hour traditional limit was more about judgment. And so the more you can do to develop your judgment, and that's definitely on the practice every day kind of thing. You can't just have that in the bag. That's something you're learning and growing in all the time. Diversity in your experience is going to help that, diversifying. But yeah, and especially getting out of your comfort zone, getting out of your local traffic pattern. But the judgment, I think that's a bit of a mystery for the people who are trying to train new pilots how to grow that judgment quickly. We don't want you to take years to grow like a normal chicken. We want to, make you like a popcorn chicken like they eat in Cochabamba that grows in 3 months. But we're not really sure how to do that on the judgment front. On the skill front, it can be done quickly, but the judgment. So know that when projects are looking at you as a candidate, they're looking for judgment and maturity. That is the most important thing, because that's what's going to keep you alive.
Just going back to the beginning of the question about, the ways to do that, and that's challenge yourself in, like, outside the traffic pattern, plan a trip somewhere you've never been, weather conditions that set your limits, but fly in some weather. Do some of the, take some loads in your aircraft, take people with you, fill it up, check out, find out the limits of density, altitude, not exceed them. Always be cautious on how far you go. Set your limits and keep within them, but challenge yourself as well. Because if you're not challenging yourself, you're not going to be advancing on the judgment. I think that's the key thing.
I would say some of the biggest experiences that I had, I got my pilot's license waxing airplanes. So if any of you guys felt like you were strapped financially, I was. I worked at a shop as a handy, just open up inspection covers and cleaning spark plugs, and I did that for years, 3. And I know I bought an airplane. I bought a Piper Tomahawk, they call them. And my dad he took out a lien on the house, and I found this airplane. It was $14,500, and I thought, man. But my brother was an A&P, and so we bought this airplane, and I flew it for a summer. I got my instrument rating, and I certified it. And what a lot of people don't know is that you only have to have one VOR with a glide slope in your airplane to get an instrument rating. That's all you have to have, and that's all my airplane had. It was a very busy instrument check ride because I had to switch between a lot of stuff, and a lot of people don't know that you can file an instrument flight plan to an airport that doesn't have an instrument approach. That's not a problem. You can do that. And understanding if it's instrument that you've not done a lot of instrument, learning the system and how it works, it's really good. If you've never filed a flight plan and gone places with it, you need to start filing flight plans. File everywhere you go, I would recommend. File if it's VFR, start filing VFR. This is another thing that I would say about learning something. Let's say you want to start flying into short strips. You say, okay, I want to do that. Well, where's a good spot to learn how to fly in a short strip? On a long strip. Yeah, you start learning on long runways. And so you're starting to, okay, well, how long does it take for me to get off? What's the weights that I'm doing? So being intentional about the flights that you're doing, this is what our brother here was telling us just a little bit ago, but thinking about my plan ahead of time. So, okay, is this today I'm going to do short field work? What's that look like? So planning your load and then figuring out where your takeoff is going to be at, guessing that, you're estimating it, and then flying it out and saying, well, am I reaching that? Did I meet that goal? How's this airplane performing? What's the temperatures? And really learning to understand what the capabilities of your aircraft are. Really, it's about knowing your airplane, whatever it is you're flying, and what its capabilities are. Well, if you're doing cross countries, well, what is its range? Yeah, what is its fuel burn? So you're planning and you understand, well, hey, look, I can't make it, and now I got to get to my alternate. What are those capacities? So as you're learning those things, the best way to learn them is to estimate them first. You make your plan, and you looking through the logbook about what the book says it can do, and then you go out and try it. Guess what? I'm in that exact process right now with the Merlin. You talk to pilots about what an airplane can do, most of them don't know. They have no idea. Well, how far? What's its fuel burn? I'm not really sure. I'm like, you don't know? No. I mean, we fly at this and it does this. I'm like, well, what does it? What can it do? Can it go that high? I don't think so. Oh, yeah, it does actually. I've had like 10 conversations with Merlin pilots. Oh, it can't do that. Well, actually, the book says it can. Well, can it or can it? Well, now I want to tell you that just because the book says it can, doesn't mean that it will. That's not the case. So learning to say, well, what does the book say? What does it actually do? How does it actually perform? These are things that you can test, and you going through that process is really helpful. So those are things that you can practice now with the aircrafts that you're flying, and being intentional instead of just, oh, I'm going to go out and fly today, and you just go off and do some random thing with no purpose. But if you get purpose behind it, then you're going to really capture each hour and gain from it. I will say some of the most experience that I had was I took that Tomahawk, and the best flight I did was fly from Michigan to Montana. And mostly because I asked my wife to be my girlfriend on that flight. That was why it was really a productive flight. But so if you find that to be something that you need to do, I would encourage you. Have those productive flights, right? So, but I learned a whole lot on that long cross country in that little Tomahawk. It took me forever to get to Montana, and I mean I flew into and I learned things about density, altitude, Billings. I was I would get into sinkholes on the way, and I was light on fuel, and I wouldn't be able to even climb them. And then when I get into a thermal going up, I'd just climb back up in my thermals, and I was just kind of riding the waves out there. When I landed in Billings, it was like density altitude of 9,000 feet in a Tomahawk, and I had to wait a long time. I wanted to go see my girlfriend. Not yet. She wasn't my girlfriend yet, but that was the plan, and I had to wait all afternoon for it to cool down. I was too afraid to take. This is a 10,000-foot runway, but it was an 8,000-foot hill. I had to get over on the other side, and I didn't know I'd be able to do it. Well, you're learning all that thing I'd never flown in the mountains before. I was talking to people, but you go try it, and those things are invaluable experiences for sure.
Yeah, go try it, but take a lot of patience with you and some camping gear.
I do want to speak to the judgment side of things, because I think we agree that the skills are somewhat more straightforward. The judgment traditionally has been a bit coincidental or incidental. Hey, I had a bad flight today. What can I learn from that? But the FAA now is really encouraging, and even in the airline environment, when I was most recently instructing our recurrency pilots, we're moving now to what we call more scenario-based situations. So in the good old days, you go out there and just do these 10 maneuvers. These days, it's more of a story. And so if you're looking at a flight school to either begin your training or to come back and do some recurrency training, come to places like Andrews and PUC, where we actually have every single training session is a scenario. And we paint a whole picture. Hey, today, this is the weather conditions, whether they're real or whether we simulate them. This is the waiting for the flight. This is the pressure. This is the requirements that we have to meet the mission requirement of this flight. And then in that case, we are asking the person who's doing the training for their decision. And then we go through the whole scenario, and they have to adjust their decision-making process throughout that scenario. And then in the debriefing, rather than just measuring what used to be the PTS standards or the ACS standards, plus or minus these tolerances. We're actually now spending the time debriefing on the judgment. Hey, why did you decide to divert to this airport? What was going through your mind? What if you had done this instead? That in the past has been coincidental or incidental. Now it should be intentional. And if you pick a good school and just ask them, hey, how do you go about teaching judgment? How do you go about helping people to learn these skills? Look for them to talk to you about the scenario-based training. If they're not doing it, I would suggest be more discerning and pick a different school.
Well, go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to make one other comment there is when you're going out on some of these you may find some people with experience that you can go along with. Might not necessarily be a flight instructor. If you get an let's just say actual instrument conditions. Getting actual instrument conditions, lots of people get instrument ratings and never flown in clouds. It happens. If you go to a school in Arizona, you're probably never seen a cloud in your life, or California. Well, California got some low-level clouds some of the year, but you might not get actual instrument, and if you've never flown actual, you got your instrument rating. That can be kind of intimidating the first time that you're in the soup, and there ain't no way to take the foggles off. You are in it until you get out of it, and so learning to get through that, finding people that have had experience and flying alongside of them. I was going to also say the risk-benefit analysis. So when you're looking at an operation, your flight that you're going to do, think about, well, what are the benefits and what are some of my risks? And I just will say that'll help you in a lot of things. Should I wait? Should I? This weather that I'm looking at is, I could wait it out. What's the risks if I don't? What's the benefits if I do? And thinking through that, and a lot of times that'll really help you be realistic. Like, well, what are the benefits if I've done this flight? Well, okay, I could gain some experience, and I get to see my girlfriend. What are the risks? Well, I could fly in the middle of a tornado. Well, maybe I will wait until that goes by, and so things like that, right?
Okay, we got a few minutes left. Got a question.
You especially who do mission work and take on new pilots, what methods and maybe formulas or what do you use to measure the proficiency of those new pilots? Like DJ was saying, sometimes 500-hour pilots are very different. So how do you measure how much wisdom they have and their proficiency? Specifically how it relates to your particular area and the airplanes you fly.
Well, I want to say DJ was one of my first ones, and Andrews had done a really good job. And I won't just say Andrews. He had a guy from Maine, Vermont, a guy that really taught him some real great stuff. So he had a lot of good instructors. Like I'll tell you, your skill sets come from your instructors. The things each instructor is its own little world. They all have their pet peeves and things that they stress. Right? I don't know if you've had that experience. I've had experience with flying with lots of different instructors, and I learn little tricks from a lot of people, and that's helpful. So what I'll say is I look at someone that comes, and I do you can analyze, well, how is their thinking process? I look at his judgment. That's the first thing I'm thinking about. Is he safe? Is he conservative in his judgment? And is he conservative in acknowledging his own skill set? And is he humble enough to listen to the things that I'm asking him to do? We'll go fly together. I'll be frank with you. One of the big emphasis that I have is I need somebody that's going to take care of the piece of equipment that he's flying. It's an expensive thing. It's easy to break. I don't want junk in it. I don't want dirt in it. I want it nice. I want him to think about when he's flying. I don't want him to mistreat my engine. And those are things that are big things for me. Like, you mistreat my engine, I'm going to chop your head off when we're flying. I'm like, hey, watch that engine there. You're flying an engine. Don't over temp that. Don't shock cool it. I don't want to fix it. Right? So DJ was mechanically minded, and he did a great job. In fact, I almost pretty much threw him the keys and said, go, just quit flying in flip-flops. That's all I told him.
Jeff was a great instructor. I think we've only flown together a few hours total in our whole lives, but it was really formative. And he told me how he wanted that engine managed, and I took it to heart. But I do remember times where he had his head in his hands, like, what are you doing? When he was trying to get me into flying IFR in Bolivia, he's like, what have you been doing? No, we're going to do it different. But just those few hours were really helpful. And I was willing to learn because he had been there. He knew the environment. He knew the system, and I didn't. And that's an important trait to have, is humility, and have a beginner's mind when you show up, and not be like, well, I'm somebody cool. Because you really, in a totally strange environment, you're really lost. I remember on the ferry flight down, we passed central Bolivia, Trinidad, and he's talking to me on the radio. I can't understand a word of Spanish. And then after an intense bunch of Spanish on the radio, he calls me, he says, do you know you almost just had a midair? And I was just oblivious. My world was so strange at that point. All I could focus on was just keeping it pointed in the right direction. Even I had 1,000 hours, but keeping 172 pointed in the right direction and making sure I had the fuel to get there, that was it. I was maxed out. And I felt like a brand new student again in that environment.
Any other input on evaluating new pilots?
I feel like, the pilots that I'm hearing are so much more advanced than where I am. But I have experience in the very narrow field. I can't comment too much on that.
Just share.
Yeah, well, I think one of the first questions Beavers was about how do we start? And I always say the start, it's always the start that stops most people. And so for young pilots who are wanting to get into mission, I would just say use every opportunity that you have, and don't wait for everything to fall into place, because God blesses those who make a small beginning with what they have. And so for a pilot who's wanting to get hours, take up those very small opportunities and make the very best of them. Don't worry about the opportunities that you don't have. God doesn't expect you to work with something you don't have. He always gives you little opportunities, and you just take those and run with them, and He will bless and abundantly provide for you and help you. When I was, I have only a private license. I don't have commercial or instrument. And I've taken that little bit of, that very small license and taken it a long way. But yeah, I being here is really opening up my mind to how much training people go through normally to become missionaries. And I'm kind of surprised at how I ended up becoming a missionary, getting 4,500 hours with so little training and so much, so much experience in actual bush flying with hardly any help to do that. And I'm kind of surprised to realize that I could have wrapped myself around a coconut tree pretty quickly. But I just believe that God's, obviously He's trying to elevate His people and help us elevate His people and help us to, aim for higher standards constantly. And I think we've got some amazing people here who can help us to reach those high goals and to aspire to great things. And I really identified with what Nathan said about the best way to learn is by teaching. And I find that in other areas, because I don't have any experience in teaching flying to anybody, but I believe that it is very true that teaching is the best way to learn anything. And so making it sounds like becoming a CFI would be a great way to become a much better pilot. But I'm very small compared to everyone else here. But I'm just so thankful that God has people who are actually available, making this kind of meeting available and this kind of atmosphere available for young people. It's just wonderful what God is doing. the work ahead of us is much greater than the work behind us. And I think, I was just saying to Curtis this morning, where's Curtis? Somewhere in here? Yeah, that, you know, we have no idea how this ministry is going to impact the future of the Adventist Church, because there is just a huge need for mission. And while some people in the church are starting to think that aviation is kind of a thing of the past, or something that's, you know, we can't work with it, the risk management is so massive. But yeah, we've got a lot ahead of us, and I think we're going to find that mission aviation is going to explode, along with all the other ministries that are happening in the church. I think there's a lot ahead of us. Anyway, we're getting a bit off track here, but yeah, I think God is leading.
Could I add to what Mark just said? As far as we need thousands more, really seriously, we need thousands more. And I didn't hear that growing up. I wish I had. There were a few old mission pilots who would say, you know, there's still an opportunity out there, and they were what kept me going. I just want to tell you guys, and tell your friends too, we need thousands more. And my experience in getting the training was like Jeff, cleaning spark plugs, you know, greasing bearings and stuff at a local shop, and piece by piece, God made it happen. And we were talking about the huge cost, but there's also a huge commitment, because it is a track that takes a lot of preparation and training. But if you're willing to take that commitment, God will see you through it. If you have patience, He'll see you through it step by step, and you'll get there, because there's a need, and if you're willing and if you're committed, He will do the rest. He'll do the impossible for you.
Okay, Dwayne, you had a comment on the current subject, and then we'll go for the question after that. Yes.
And that is, I was so amazed when Laura told me this morning that there's one aircraft in the Philippines and there's two in Belize, I think, South America, which are waiting for pilots, or is it Guyana? Isn't it amazing that we have more aircraft than we have pilots for? I think that's astounding.
Yeah, regarding, you know, evaluating and stuff, I think I've learned some hard lessons over the last years too in regard to that, but we need, and we're working on kind of a solid evaluation process that we can take each person through and ensure they have the knowledge, the judgment, the skills they need to, you know, operate safely in that environment. So it's kind of something that's being worked on and developed, but hopefully it will be something that can be utilized kind of across the board here within mission aviation.
You know, that's the problem. We keep coming up with things to say, but this guy has I'll hold my thought.
Okay. Go ahead. Yeah. If it's on the current subject, go for it.
It's just about evaluations, and I will say, having a passion for that mission and having mature judgment. I go back and tell you, these machines are so hard to get and so easy to break. Their airplanes are just so easy to break. And I remember I had this plane come back, and I'm so thankful that in the years I've flown, I've never cracked a cylinder. Not one. I've never had a cracked cylinder. And I had that's 172 that you brought down. The first annual, I had another rookie pilot flying it, and the first annual, I had 4 cracked cylinders. I said, 4 cracked cylinders. Well, guess what? I found out later on that guy thought it was really cool to chop the power and do like power slides in the air. He's a young kid. These are not, guess what? He ceased to fly for me. That was it. It's like judgment. Like we're on a mission here. These things are hard to keep. This isn't a game. We're not here just, it's not a doom buggy. You know what I'm saying? Like this is a serious deal. This stuff costs money. And we're out here to do God's mission. Like that kind of judgment. I'm looking also at the dedication and the seriousness you have, do you have a sense of responsibility? Can you drive a motorcycle carefully or a car carefully? I look at how you treat other stuff. If you can't treat something that's less valuable with care, you think I'm interested in turning over $100,000 and some object to your care? Not on your life. So, I'm just speaking from a young guy's perspective, which life is exciting and fun and dirt bikes and it's an adventure and it's great. But this is a lot of responsibility. It takes a ton to get one of these little pieces of aluminum to that country and get it, registered and signed. All the nonsense you got to go through. And then find out that somebody's been hot dogging it, doing donuts in the sky, and now I got 4 cracked cylinders. No, this is not good. So I'm just talking about judgment and thinking about that process. Anyway, that little story came to mind, and I figured I'd make that comment.
Belgrove.
I'm just curious, in terms of how you all support yourself in the mission field, do you solely depend on donations, or do you have side businesses or side things to support your family and donations go to the ministry? What are your thoughts on that, donation versus side businesses?
It's a great question. I just made a comment. I'll have a comment. I'll make a comment first.
God may open opportunities to have side things, but I think the thing a person has to be careful of is that it doesn't start absorbing your focus away from the purpose you're there for. And the best security you can have is a strong prayer life. And taking all your needs to the Lord, and He provides one way or another. Sometimes that can be through other profit-making things. It's not out of the question, but oftentimes I have found that God simply wants us to trust Him. I try to live by Jesus' counsel in Matthew 6. I think it's 25 to 35. But God is faithful if we're continually seeking to put our trust in Him, and He may not give us above and beyond what we need, but He will always give us what we need.
What was his name?
Belgrove.
Belgrove. I want to tell you, I've been doing this for 20-some years. And the longer I do it, the less answers I have to your question. I made a deal with God. I'd work for Him if He'd take care of my family, and He's been faithful. I will say that I do believe that part of I don't like to say I'm a volunteer, because God does pay me somehow. Like, I get paid. I eat, I have clothes, I have a place to stay, I drive vehicles. My family goes to school. If they get sick, they get taken care of. Like, God figures out how to take care of my needs. It's a radical way of thinking. I don't know that we all have the same recipe exactly, but I'll tell you that the Matthew 6 principle, we all live. Like, it's seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. Don't worry about what you're going to eat. Don't worry about what you're going to drink. Look at the birds. We're flying people. Well, look at them. They don't plant. They don't harvest. Yet God takes care of them. It's totally contrary to my nature. And it still is. And I still would like to have better answers. I'd love to tell you that, well, I have an investment fund. I figured out how to manage digital currencies, and I make millions of dollars. I don't do any of those things. And I frankly, I'm terrible at publications and newsletters, and I'm awful at all of that stuff. But one thing that I do try and do is I just try and be faithful. I want to hear, like, those words, well done, thou good and faithful. I close my eyes and I just think about Jesus saying that to me. Well done, Jeff. You did what I asked you to do. that's what I want. And I really, he's been good. He's been good. And yes, he's provided so many ways. People have donated. Sometimes I've done things, I've made money. Yep, I've done that too. Sometimes I've made, in fact, well, anyway, sometimes I do things that I feel like probably he'd rather, why are you doing these? What are you doing again? No, I didn't ask you to do that. Why don't you get back over here and get on what I asked you to do? Those experiences happen quite a little bit too. But if we seek first His kingdom, He'll be faithful. In fact, everybody asks me a lot of times, Jeff, how do you survive? And if you would guess, my survival is actually quite low on the Jeff worry poll. Like the things I'm worried about, like that, we've got schools and people and missionaries and the whole machine of Palmas, think about all that. What Dwayne's going to eat today is pretty small on that budget, right? You follow what I'm saying, Belgrove? So pretty soon, I remember I started worrying about $100 a month. Like me eating, that was my eating budget, and this was the worry. And then they asked me to take on a high school, which was $2,000 a month. Then the budget worry got a whole lot worse, and yeah, I stressed out about it. And yep, there was a whole bunch of things God did to provide for that. And I experienced like God's provision, and it was awesome. But think, Belgrove, someday you're going to operate an airplane in the mission field. How are you going to put gas in that thing? Well, your food is nothing compared to gassing up an airplane. And then guess what? That thing is going to break on you. Yep, I can't tell you. Anybody here who operates airplanes, we've all had them, and we all have them break. And when they break, forget about gas. Gas is nothing. How are you going to fix that dumb broken airplane? That's like $30,000. That's 40 grand. Like, man, this is big money. Yeah, I've got this broken piece of aluminum to fix, and I don't know how I want to find parts for this thing. It's just, my engine just grenaded. Then God's going to figure it out for you. And He's going to fix it. And you're going to fly it again. But that's the miracles that you're going to experience. And you're going to figure out that He is a faithful God. And He has a million ways that we don't even know I have a clue about.
We have just a couple minutes left. Mark, DJ, do you have some quick comments?
Okay, yeah. Can I make a suggestion for anybody who wants to be involved in mission? One of the most important things about not really fundraising, but the way it happens, and I know this from experience, and that is that people don't generally give to something that's a dead cause. Like, people want to see that something's happening, and it's I call it momentum. And missions have momentum, and I've experienced slowing of momentum. I know what that does, and I know what increased momentum feels like. And basically, when it comes to mission, although we don't actually do fundraising per se, we don't actually go out and ask for money directly, but one of the most important things that drives people to give is when they can see that you are doing what you could to make it happen. And so, for example, like a classroom, like building a classroom, we've had our volunteer working with us and saying, we don't have the money for this, how are we going to do this? And I said to him, well, let's not ask anybody or not expect anybody to support this classroom until we've dug the foundations. We can dig the foundations, we can put up the string lines, we can do something. We may not have anything towards the actual building project, but we can do something and then tell people, okay guys, this is what we've done, and this is what's needed. And the same applies to mission aviation. There's no difference. Basically, you go into everything that you do every single thing that is possible within the realms of possibility for you to make a beginning. You do that, and then when you get to that point, that's when you start saying, okay, if there's anybody who can help with the next step, that's the time to say it. Don't say it before. Don't say anything until you've done everything that you can do. And when you get to that point, 99 times out of 100, you'll find that the money's actually there to do the next step, and it will continue that way. Yeah, just a suggestion.
Like gathering the oil pots and then pouring the oil.
Yeah, lean times are, if you develop that prayer life that Dwayne's talking about, there'll be times of great spiritual blessing, and God will use those to prepare you for great material blessings. And I'd also say there's all sorts of methods and techniques and practices out there. None of them, many of them may be good. Many of them are good. But I wouldn't put God in a box. A lot of times we try to nail it down and we're like, okay, God works this way. This is the biblical way. Well, when I read the old mission stories, I read about Hudson Taylor, who never, ever asked anybody for money. And his mission went from 0 to 800 missionaries in China in 30 years. And then I read about William Carey, who he had the idea that you should be self-supporting. I think God winks at us a lot of times. We have this idea, or maybe he puts it in there because that's the model he's going to have us use. And so William Carey's mission board sent him over the course of his lifetime 600 pounds for his personal support. Out of the high government jobs that he was given that gave him influence over the entire country of India and it enabled them to break open the prohibition on missionaries going to India, he gave back 40,000 pounds into the mission. It was completely backwards because God gave him jobs that gave him the influence he needed over young people, teaching them about God, plus a salary. So, and then there's other people who are great fundraisers and can convince many people to get involved and be part of the team. So there's many, many ways, and I think some of us like to put God in a box, and we're like, he's going to do it this way for me. But keep an open mind, because I would just say, do what he asks you to do. That's just the bottom line, and he'll take care of the rest. It's his work. And Hudson Taylor said, people said, you're taking your kids to India and you don't even have support. And he's like, well, I'm taking my kids to India and it doesn't seem to be hard for me to remember that they need to eat 3 times a day as their father. I think my Heavenly Father remembers the same about me.
Okay, we're basically out of time.
He's got his, he's had it.
Okay, quick question.
So how do you guys be missionaries and not just really cool bush pilots?
Do we have any quick answers?
I got a quick answer for that. A missionary is not focused on his talents, his contribution, what he can do. A missionary is primarily focused on the people that he is serving and what their needs are. And if a true missionary, even if he's a fantastic pilot, and he gets to the mission situation and finds out there is no need for a pilot, he doesn't try to be a pilot because he's focused on the needs of the people. He will be a pilot when there is a need for a pilot, and he will be a mechanic, or he will do anything. He'll do medical work. He'll do anything that's needed. Or if he can't do it, he'll get someone else in to do it, and then become a facilitator and actually be the contact person to make it happen. So being a missionary is actually about making it happen for the people that you're serving, not about taking your special skill set and saying, okay, guys, I'm here with my package, and this is what I'm going to do for you. That is a very dangerous thing to bring to the mission field. And if you want to talk more on that topic, talk to Cliff. We had a great conversation. He's got a lot of thoughts in that area.
It's also, keeping your eyes off of yourself and what you're doing, but working with others. We have one area we've been working in very closely with the pastor, and he's been the connection, the connecting link between the airplane and the hospital, and that has given him great influence in the community. The church was really struggling in that area, had maybe 25 members when he got there, and over the past 4 or 5 years there's been over 500 people baptized. And while us as the pilots, we're not necessarily playing a direct role in the evangelization, he said what has given him the success he had was that link with the airplane, people seeing that we as Adventists care for their needs and are trying to help them, and that breaks down a lot of barriers.
I'll just make this quick comment. Being a missionary is a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle. It's not a place. It's not a career. This is our lifestyle, what we do. Having a passion for Jesus. We have passions for airplanes. We're pilots. We like to talk about them. But I pray that we're missionaries first. In other words, we have a passion for Jesus. I would say this guy, Brock, with Gideon Rescue, we have Gideon. Brock is an awesome guy, loves Jesus. If any of you have met him, I had an opportunity to go on this disaster response. We sung the Blessed Hope on the a French Marine vessel. Brock is not afraid to talk about Jesus, not afraid to hand out a tract about Jesus. And we had an awesome time. And when I got to this island, they didn't need pilots. I thought they'd need the paramedics. They didn't need paramedics. In fact, I did a bunch of mechanics fixing generators. And people I'm bend over this little generator with a toolkit from a motorcycle box, trying no tools. And they were so surprised. I'm a pilot, and here I'm fixing all these little generator things and serving people and loving them and caring. People can tell if you care about them in a nanosecond. It's not rocket science to communicate that you love someone. I had a guy come up to me, it was a black guy, and he wanted we sang a song, and we were in the sweet by and by, and I gave him a big hug, and I told him, brother, don't miss out on heaven. It's not worth missing out on. We want to be seeking Jesus. Now is the time. So having that passion for Jesus is a lifestyle. It's a way we live. It's what we talk about. We can talk about airplanes, but I hope we can talk more about Jesus.
Okay, we're out of time at this point, but I did want to wrap up with one quick round for everybody on the panel. I would say try to answer in 30 seconds or less, what are some skills or traits that you're not seeing in the newer generation of pilots coming out that you're working with? Veronica, you want to start on that end for a change?
It just seems like everybody knows how to push buttons.
DJ.
I don't know. I haven't. I'm still on the last question. Sorry.
Answer the last question in 30 seconds.
For me, the last question is the difference between a volunteer and a missionary is a huge difference. But it's God's business in your life. So connect with Him. That's where it all flows out of. The love for people comes out of love for Him, which only comes out of your devotional life. So I would say, in one sentence, how to become a missionary depends on your devotional life. The difference between most of us in aviation, we're going to start out as volunteers because we got into it because of aviation, right? Most of us. That's how I did. I was not a missionary. But God's in the business of making each one a missionary, and He'll do it.
Young people have always been lacking in perseverance in comparison to those who were seasoned missionaries. And so I would say to the same thing, I'm sure it applied many years ago. It is so important to have grit and perseverance if you want to be successful in mission. It's the same with any career, but I mean, this is a holy calling, and if you want to be a good missionary, you've got to stick it through the hard times. You just got to stick it out. Simple as that.
Yeah, perseverance for sure. I think I know this is a really easy thing to say, but all of us have become really dependent on problem solving with Google and YouTube, and missions. It takes a little more than just that, and patience that I think we lose. And I know all of us, I think, are losing patience when it comes to problem solving. And just as a young person coming into situations when you are, you feel like you're not getting the answers that you need fast enough, take a breath. And maybe consult with someone who's got more experience in that area, and just give it some time. That's probably the single thing I would say.
I was going to say the same thing as Mark, and also Judd, and also Veronica. So I'll pass the mic on.
Yeah, that's some more or less my observation too. But yeah, problem solving. Like if you don't know how to do something that's new to you, figure it out. Sit down, study it, figure it out. Don't just give up and walk away from it. You know, if you have a human resource, you know, someone to ask, you know, ask for help or whatever. But, you know, there's a lot of things I have learned by doing it. I didn't know how to do it, but, well, you know, you sit down, you figure it out, and go forward, and then you know how to do it after that. It's one more thing to add to your knowing how to do. But yeah, it just seems like that's one area we've seen kind of a weak spot in the current generation. Just kind of, oh, well, I've never done that, and so that's the end of it, instead of figuring it out.
Don't be afraid to fail.
Yeah, that's part of it.
Don't be afraid to do things 6 times. Because I do this. In fact, I've got a little project that Carlos and I were working on. I put a transmission in, watched a YouTube video on it, missed a step, and gonna have to pull the transmission back out and go all the way back to the beginning and fix that step and then put it back in. It's all right. It's just work. Don't be afraid of work either. It's all right. It's a gift from God. It won't hurt you. It really isn't. It's not a curse. It's a blessing. And but go for it. You know, make it happen. There's no and that I think a lot of folk are, you know, I don't know if it's this generation. I just think in general, we tend to let our fears paralyze us. And I think that fear is, a lot of it's a fear of failing. But you know, who's on your side? If God is with us, who can be against us? And I can tell you that God is a patient teacher. And be assured, you look in, you see us sitting up here, and it's all testaments. We are all living testaments to that very fact, that God is a patient teacher for all of us, right?
Thank you very much to the panel, and thank you for everyone that came and listened. And this is what Elevate's here for, simply to share and to learn and to grow with each other. We're going to take a real quick break, 5 minutes, run to the bathroom, grab a drink of water.